how do I know the Hebrew Matthew I have from 1380, over 1,000 years after the gospel was written? How do I know that's an original Hebrew source? It's a very long period of transmission. Say transmission. A period of over 1,000 years of transmission. But the advantage is it's not a translation. Say translation. It's an original Hebrew document. Now the Greek, and I tell people, don't throw away the Greek text. I'm not saying look at the Hebrew and ignore the Greek and ignore the Aramaic and the other ancient sources. I'm not saying that at all. That's not a scholarly thing to say. The Aramaic has value and the Greek has value. The Greek is still your primary text of the Gospel of Matthew, no question. The Hebrew is another witness, and a witness that provides information that's often lost in the Greek. We're going to see some examples today. You've already seen one with the name Yeshua, kind of an important example, you would think. Something that's lost in the Greek. It's just not there in the Greek. So the Hebrew is another witness. The advantage of the Greek, the advantage of the Hebrew is although it has a long transmission, it's not a translation. The advantage of the Greek is there's a short transmission, but it is a translation. And sometimes things are lost in translation. And that's why it's important to look at the original. Now, as a skeptic, I say maybe there's another explanation for this verse in Matthew 18, verse 35. Maybe it was written in Hebrew, translated into Greek, and then in the 1380s, translated back into Hebrew. How do I know that didn't happen? The way to find out if that's a possibility is to look at the Greek. So let's look at the Greek and see what the Greek says. Here's what the Greek says. It says, and what we're looking for in the Greek is the word complete. If the word complete is in the Greek, I haven't really proven anything. Because it could be a back translation from Greek into Hebrew, and by coincidence, it appears to be like a Hebrew original. Here's what the Greek says. So shall my heavenly Father also will do to you if each of you from his heart does not forgive his brother his trespasses. The word complete isn't there. So it can't be a back translation from Greek. It has to be something original to the Hebrew. He uses the word shalem 5 times throughout the passage. Shalem, 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 shalem. And then he brings the punchline in classic Hebrew word pun, shalem meaning complete. And the people would have heard this and their mouths would have dropped. This is the type of thing that you hear this once and you remember it. It's a beautiful embroidery of Hebrew words and Hebrew meanings. This is classic type of thing you find in the Hebrew prophets. No question this was written in Hebrew and that we have a Hebrew original that preserves that information. It doesn't say throw away the Greek. It just says this is a witness and we need to pay attention to. Let's go on. Here's an example of a word pun in the Greek. The Greek has a word pun too. And for some Greek scholars, this is the silver bullet that proves the Gospel of Matthew was written in Greek, this one word pun. Yeshua says, you are Peter, in Greek Petros, and upon this rock I will build my church. Petros, Petri, classic word pun, but in the Greek. The silver bullet, the definitive proof. Except the very same verse has a word pun in Hebrew. And in Hebrew it says, you are a stone, in Hebrew Evan, say Evan, and I will build my house of prayer upon you. Remember, Hebrew is the concise language. The 3 words, I will build. In Hebrew, that's Evneh. Say Evneh. Evan, Evneh, classic Hebrew word pun. Now, based on this one verse, there's no way to know which one's original, the Hebrew or the Greek. But there's dozens of word puns in the Hebrew. There's only one in the Greek. So which one is the original? You got to decide that for yourselves, ultimately. All I can do as a scholar is present you with the evidence. If you have enough faith to believe that the Greek is the original and the Hebrew is just a translation, that's between you and your God. All I can do is present you with the evidence. And it really does I do think it comes down to a matter of faith. Now, this passage is something that I wrote about in my first book, The Hebrew Yeshua versus the Greek Jesus. And it says there, and I'll very briefly present this, it says, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. Moses' seat was a special chair in the synagogue, and the idea was that the scribes and Pharisees sitting in that seat could teach with authority. And anything they taught, they claimed, had Mosaic authority. He says, that all therefore whatsoever they bid you observe, that observe and do. Bid in plain old nice English is command. Say bid. Bid is command. Whatever they bid you to observe, command you to observe, that observe and do. This is a strange statement coming from Yeshua because he has a lot of run-ins with the Pharisees in which he warns his disciples about the leaven of the Pharisees and various things like that. But here he seems to be saying they have Mosaic authority, obey whatever they tell you to do. Now, the reason I was looking into this verse is as a Karaite Jew, I don't accept the authority of the Pharisees. By the way, Pharisee does not mean hypocrite. That's what I found many Christians believe, that Pharisee is just a fancy Hebrew word for hypocrite. It does not mean that. It actually means separated ones, separated in the sense that they are holier than the multitudes, so they believed. And it's an ancient Jewish movement that exists to this day. It's no longer called Pharisees. Now they call themselves Orthodox rabbis. My father, who is an Orthodox rabbi to this day, he will tell you, he has ordination from a previous rabbi, who has ordination from a previous rabbi, going all the way back to the Pharisees of the first century, and he would say all the way back to Moses. So this is an ancient thing. It goes back at least 2,200 years. It was already around for a couple hundred years in the time of Yeshua. And these Pharisees were, when Yeshua talked about the Pharisees, you can't understand what he meant if you don't know what a Pharisee is. Now, I was raised as a modern-day Pharisee. One of the central doctrine of the Pharisees is what I already mentioned, that there were two Torahs given on Mount Sinai, the written Torah and the oral Torah. I talk about more of them in my book, The Hebrew Yeshua versus the Greek Jesus. Here's the seat of Moses in Chorazin, Israel, which is in northern Israel near the Sea of Galilee. It was a literal chair in which the people sat, or which the Pharisees would sit and teach with authority. Here's another one in Delos, which is an island off the coast of Greece. And it's the oldest synagogue that's been found from around 250 BC. And already that oldest synagogue ever found has a seat of Moses. So this is not a new thing that came about that Yeshua made up. When he says the Pharisees and scribes sit in Moses' seat, everybody knew what a Moses' seat was. They saw it last week in the synagogue. But then he says that obey whatever they tell you to do, which is kind of strange. Once you actually look at the types of things the Pharisees command people to do, you realize if you're going to take what Yeshua said seriously and obey everything the Pharisees said, you really have your work cut out for you. You have no idea what you're getting into. Let me give you a simple example that I grew up with. This is from the teachings of the Pharisees, of the rabbis, because they have rules and regulations that cover every aspect of life from the moment you wake up in the morning to the moment you go to sleep at night. One of their rules says as follows. It says a person must first put on his right shoe, but not tie it. It's very important, the details. Then he must put on his left shoe and tie it and go back and tie his right shoe. Now, did Yeshua really care what shoe you put on first in the morning? Maybe he did, but don't you think if he did, he would have said that? So what does he mean when he says the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat? All therefore whatsoever they bid command you to observe, that observe and do. What's going on there? Something's missing. And if you look throughout his ministry, it's not consistent with the rest of the things he seems to be teaching. There's actually another ruling from another rabbi who came along, and he lived in a country where they didn't have shoelaces. This was the land of Crocs. And here's what he says. He says, even with our shoes, which do not have laces, a person must still put on his right shoe first. Seriously? Yeshua wanted to tell you which Croc to put on first?